Hi guys, another video. So scale apps in Azure App Services. Auto-scaling helps with meeting varying customer requirements while controlling costs associated with these resources. Auto-scaling requires configuring rules to add and remove resources. Then under the topic of examine auto-scaling, we have can be triggered by schedule or shortage of excess resources. So we can trigger autoscaling using a schedule, so time-based, or shortage or excess of resources, right? Autoscaling is a cloud system or process that adjusts available resources based on current demand. Perform scaling in and out. It's opposed to up and down. So autoscaling does not do an up or down scaling, but it does an in and out. So meaning it multiplies the instances and reduces the number of instances as and when required. It does not change the compute power upwards. Then autoscaling in app service monitors the resource matrix of the web app and as it runs. Autoscale changes the environment by adding or removing web servers and balancing the load between them. Autoscaling does not have any effect on the CPU power, memory, or storage capacity of the web server powering the app. App scaling rules specify the threshold for metrics. The threshold for metrics can also deallocate resources when workload has diminished. So if the workload goes down, it can do the what you call downscale essentially. In a DDoS attack, autoscaling can be expensive. Therefore, it is important to implement detection and filtering of requests before they reach your service. So you need some sort of way to filter content and block them as and when requests are just becoming too much to prevent the DDoS attack, right? Autoscaling provides elasticity, improves availability, and fault tolerance. Autoscaling is not useful when requests perform resource-intensive processes. This requires manual scaling up or down, right? So if your requests are performing intense processes, you cannot autoscale. You can only autoscale on that particular front. Autoscaling not as it's not okay. Maybe here I missed the word. Autoscaling is not a solution for handling long-term growth, right? So if you think your system will grow at some point and will require more resources, autoscaling is not for that. Autoscaling has overhead associated with monitoring resources and determining whether to trigger and scale event or not, right? Identifying factors, identify autoscale factors. Autoscale can be configured based on combination of factors, right? Uh, that's not necessary actually. I can delete that. Autoscale is feature of app service plan used by web app. When scaling out, Azure defines the new instance of hardware defined by the app service plan. So we don't scale the app service itself, but the app service plan is getting scaled on the app. Use instance limit to prevent runway scaling. So there's something called uh, instance limit to prevent runway scaling. So this is when we are forever scaling over the limits of our budgets and all of those type of things. Plans our app service plans in more expensive pricing tiers have a higher limit. Cannot create more instances than the tier limit. Okay, cool. So there's limit for pricing tiers, right? But when you go up the pricing tier, you get higher limits essentially. And B, not all app service plans pricing tiers support auto scaling, right? Let us find out. Let's go back to Azure and say uh, pricing tiers that support auto scaling. Let me see. Scale up and okay, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for scale in uh, functionality. Auto scaling. Okay, okay. Okay, maybe if I go to that, best practices. This is not what I wanted to. To scale. Let's do this overview. Go to scaling. Source rules. That no, we're not getting where I want to get to. Okay, this is supported services for autoscaling web apps, cloud service, virtual machines, apps, Azure App Service, API management, Azure Data Explorer. We have Logic Apps, Spring Cloud Service Bus. So if you look at this, Logic App, if you look at App Service, we have Web App that technically gets hosted in that particular thing. I don't know where that thing is, but I wanted to see the limits. Uh, okay, let me say auto basic, okay, standard pricing here, auto scaling instance limit. Okay, scale out. This is what you can read scale out. Scale out. Yep, this is not giving me what you want. You can scale out to as many as 30 instances depending on the pricing tier. Further increases the scale count to 100. So in isolated, we can grow up to 100. For other pricing tier, we can go up to 30 instances. Okay, spending limits. Scale up pricing. No, scale. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Okay, that doesn't show me what I wanted to get to. But anyways, on our notes, what we can add is isolated, limited to 100 instances. Other plans look like 30. Cool. So that is our limit. Okay, then auto scaling conditions. We can scale based on a matrix or we can scale based on a schedule as read above, and combine schedule and matrix. So we can combine both schedule and matrix. Matrix you can monitor for auto scaling for web apps. So the monitors that we can monitor for that includes CPU percentage, memory percentage, disk queue length, HTTP queue length, data in and data out. Can also auto scale using metrics from other services. For example, if the service bus queue has a huge number of items held exceeding a critical limit, you can then, if let's say for example, you have a service bus, you have an Azure function associated with the service bus, you can auto scale that to have it run multiple instances. How an autoscale rule analyzes metrics, analyzes trends in metrics values over time across all instances. Analysis is a multi-step process. The first step of that particular process is to aggregate metrics value. It aggregates metrics value for 1 minute, known as time grain, right? Each metric has its own intrinsic time grain, but at most 1 minute. So could be different, but at most 1 minute. The aggregated value is called time aggregation with options with option being average, minimum, maximum, total, last, and then account. Because 1 minute interval is very short, autoscale run performs second step further aggregation, further aggregates the values from the time aggregation first step, right? Users can specify the duration with minimum being 5 minutes. So for the second step, the minimum time to do the further aggregation is 5 minutes. So that takes all those 1 minute time aggregations, populates them, and based on that, it takes a 5 minute gap and does the second aggregation. Autoscaling actions. These actions are performed when an autoscaler rule detects a matrix crossing a threshold, right? When we cross a threshold, then we now trigger based on a rule. Actions are scale in and scale out, as we mentioned. Autoscaling actions can be can have a cooldown period specified in minutes, where during that period the autoscale rule won't be triggered, right? This allows the system to stabilize between autoscaling events. Minimum cooldown period is uh, 5 minutes. Must define autoscaling rules in pairs. You must define autoscaling rules in pairs, one for scaling out, one for scaling in. Because if you set one and not the other, what would happen is you will scale out and never scale back in, or you scale in and never scale out. And define multiple rules in the same autoscaling condition, right? Multiple rules in same autoscaling condition. The scale out needs to match at least one of the rules. Scale out must match at least one rule, at least one rule, while scale in needs to meet all. Scale in needs to meet all scale rules. That's the difference. So for us to scale out, if at least one, if let's say for example we have a setup where we monitoring multiple monitors, so or matrices, we can scale out by any of the matrices reaching the threshold. But if you want to scale down, all the conditions must be met. So all matrices must be below the thresholds that we have set on the scale down rule. By default, app service plan only implements manual scaling. So by default, you don't have auto scaling configured. Customized auto scale reveals condition groups you can use to manage your scale settings. And B, not all pricing tiers support auto scaling. B1 tier only offers manual scaling. From standard to premium level tier of offering scaling tier. So standard uh, to premium tiers offer auto scaling. So basic tier only gives us manual scaling. Then I'm assuming free and thing does not have that. Default scale condition is exceeded when none of the scale conditions are active. Scale conditions have minimum and maximum number of instances. So on a scale condition, we can specify minimum number and maximum number of instances. Maximum cannot exceed tier limit. Can monitor auto scale activity using Azure portal where you see a graph, can run history of instances spanned up and the rule execute to increase or decrease the instance. So this can be monitored. That can be monitored on the Azure portal where you see a graph, run history of instances spanned up and the rule that caused this particular instances. Best practices for autoscaling. Autoscaling successes and failures are logged in activity log, right? Successes and failures are logged in activity log, and therefore you can get notified by email, SMS, webhooks, or whenever the activity or there is an activity. The best practices, Right, let's get into auto scaling best practices. Ensure that the maximum and minimal values are different and have an adequate margin between them. So do not have your maximum and minimum being 2 and 2. So have a gap between those so that auto scaling can be able to adjust accordingly. Choose the appropriate statistic for your diagnostic matrix. Average statistics in common. Choose the threshold carefully for all matrix types. Consider ratios for scaling when multiple rows are configured in a profile. Always select a safe default instance count. Configure autoscale notifications. So autoscaling will post notifications to activity log on the following conditions occur. Autoscale issues a scale operation, autoscale savers successfully complete a scale action, autoscale savers fails to take a scale action, metrics are not available for autoscale savers to make scale decision, metrics are available, recovery again to make scale decision. You can also use activity log alert to monitor the health of autoscale engine. In addition to using activity log alert, you can also configure email and webhook notifications to get notified for successful scale actions via the notifications tab on the autoscale settings. Cool. That is it with autoscaling. I'll explore app service deployment slots after the video. I hope this makes sense, and thank you.